welcome to Beyond the Noise, the podcast series from PRWeek UK. I'm PRWeek's Siobhan Holt, and today I'm joined by Lisa Parfitt, former Managing Director of Engine Sport, who is now co-founder of The Space Between, which is a creative marketing agency which specialises in sport and entertainment. Lisa is also a director at Women in Football, which many will know is an organisation that is driving gender equality in the game. She's joining us today to discuss the UEFA Women's Euros and the lessons for comms professionals. Before we begin, I'd like to caveat that we are recording this episode ahead of the Lionesses playing the Euros final against Spain. Fingers crossed, we hope. But welcome, Lisa. Let's kick off then, no pun intended there. From a comms lens, what brand campaigns have stood out to you during this year's tournament?
Thanks very much, and thanks for the introduction. Well, I think from a comms and PR perspective, what is always really interesting when it comes around to these big global sporting events is actually how, particularly in PR and comms, how well the brands who aren't necessarily officially associated with the tournament or with any of the teams respond and the campaigns they create. Because obviously there are so many restrictions now and there's so many legal parameters around ambushing around these tournaments and being able to use the IP. But actually, I think what's really interesting is that PR and comms is a brilliant platform and channel to be able to activate and campaign around them without getting yourself into too much trouble. So I think it's been really interesting from the brands who aren't necessarily officially associated with the tournament. So, for example, White Stuff has created a really lovely campaign called Still Roaring. They have gone back and they have found the original Lionesses, and they are championing those Lionesses who would never have got the platform or the visibility or the credit that our Lionesses are getting today. They've taken photographs of them, they've been integrated into the retail experience, and they've been using their stories really strongly in their comms, PR and content. And I think it's just a really nice way of being able to take the moment, actually have something quite meaningful, perfect for the kind of their demographic and audience, but as I said, it's all earned and they're not using any IP within that. I always love what Asda do around big tournaments and football events in particular. They are offering free walk-in blood pressure checks, which after watching the semi-final the other night, I think we all needed a blood pressure check. My Apple Watch gave me a heart warning the other night. So, yeah, the hearts have been absolutely racing, but they always do something with such lovely purpose and meaning. They've done stuff around social connection before in the community, and I just think this is a really lovely way. They've connected their comms with a real issue with Public Health England around, how many people in the country have undiagnosed high blood pressure. But again, brilliant for their audience, really nice and purposeful, but doing purpose in a really quite fun way. And then what I really love to see is actually just the true integration of comms. And that's why it's actually difficult to actually really define some of the PR specific work, because actually the brands that are officially part of the tournament in some way are integrating their comms so brilliantly into their brand campaigns. So for example, Everyone Needs a Squad is celebrating how football brings young girls' communities confidence. And they did a really great survey which showed that 93% of girls who took part in sport felt more confident and that football gave them a sense of belonging. So really nice to see how well integrated that is into a kind of a really big campaign. And the other one I just wanted to call out, it's not a brand campaign per se, but you may have heard about the retail space Style of Our Own on Regent Street, which was opened this year for the summer, and it is stocking equipment and apparel for women who take part in sports. And it's got the likes of brands, the likes of Ida Sports, who make the only women's football boot, Faldis, who do shirts within the women's games. It's got sports bras, it's got underwear to help you with leaking. The PR that they have generated has been incredible. And the reason they've done such a great job is that it is truly authentic to what is going on in the women's sport space. They have activated the community. They have had events almost every single day of the summer, ranging from, viewings of different matches to hockey to netball. And I'm going to be there tonight for a panel related to entrepreneurs who are creating businesses in the women's sports space with Xero, who's an accountancy software platform. So they've really, really diversified. And I don't know anybody that hasn't been down there and been really inspired about all these businesses that are just creating brilliant, brilliant stuff for women that want to play sport.
Have you noticed any trends then this year? I mean, would you say there's maybe more purpose-led?
What I've noticed this year is actually less purpose, which I think is a sign of the quality of the performance. I think we have moved the brands that you've now got in the space, activating around the space, haven't come in because it's a good thing to do, or it's the right thing to do, or it ticks a box related to ESG or CSR. These are brands who are activating because there is a good audience, they're the right audience, they're a very highly engaged audience. And so actually what I've seen is much more focus on performance rather than purpose. One of the campaigns that we've been working on with Xero is 2 years ago for the FIFA Women's World Cup. It was about dreams and dreaming bigger, and it's the World Cup's the biggest thing, but that's what small businesses are trying to do: dream bigger, do bigger things. This year, it's about feel on top of your game, and it's about the performance of the athletes and how you feel. If you feel great and on top of your game, you're going to give a brilliant performance. So there's been a real shift there in sentiment, because over the last 2 years, there's been a shift. We're not dreaming anymore. This isn't kind of just about saving the world. This is about 11 women going on the pitch, doing an amazing job. And that's where I've seen a real shift, actually slight shift away from purpose. The other thing I think we've seen is a real kind of cultural personality to a lot of the campaigns. I think if you look at how the Lionesses launched their kit this year, the styling was just so on point. It was so on trend. It was really beautiful. Every Lioness was dressed in a way that, young women felt was like really relatable, but also quite aspirational as well. It wasn't kind of, here's the kit, this is our playing kit. It was like, how do you style this for life? How do you style this for going down to your local pub, for going to meet your girlfriends? And I think, again, you see that with Pepsi, you're seeing it with Google Pixel as well. It's just, there's a really lovely kind of personality that's coming through a lot of the campaigns, I think is reflecting the personality of the women's game.
So how then would you say has women in football used strategic PR and comms to highlight the women's game in the national consciousness, especially for the Euros?
So at Women in Football, my role on the board there is to support with kind of comms and marketing. And one of our biggest challenges actually is we're about equality in football. So not just in women's football, this is about making sure that we have equity and equality for women across the game, whether they're working in men's football or working in women's football. And we often get pigeonholed in women's football. As soon as women's football took off, we became women's football. Now, women's football is a really important pillar of what we do. And we have a big workforce that we support in the women's game. But actually for us, it's about making sure that we're really clear that we're supporting all women working in the game. That said, it is a really important window for us to be able to talk about what we're doing, what continue needs to change, using it as a platform to continue to lobby for changes, whether that's within governance, within organisations, or whether that's related to things like the online harm bill, etc. So we use it as a great platform. Sadly, in years gone by, it's been big events where things have gone wrong, where we've used it as an opportunity. For example, during the FIFA Women's World Cup, the Rubiales instance, the Infantino coming out telling us all to push that open door. We use that as a platform to highlight, actually, these are proof points to the issues of culture we've got, the problems we've got in the culture of football. What's been nice is we haven't had those until very recently related to Jess Carter. So actually, it's about the positivity and it's about celebrating the women who are doing an amazing job and without whom these events wouldn't be able to take place. The women who are behind the cameras, who are in front of the cameras, the referees, those in marketing, those doing in PR, those who are agents, that, without them, this event wouldn't be able to take place. So we've been able to focus a bit more positively this time round. notwithstanding, there have been some issues that we've spoken out on too.
Yeah, and we'll talk about those in a second. But how was the strategy then going into the Euros then from that point of view, and how well received was it from the media?
We have really, really strong relationship with the media, and that's probably largely related to the fact that women in football was originally started by women who were working in the media. 15, 20 years ago, the traditional press boxes at football stadiums were not the most welcoming place for women who were working in the game to turn up to. And so we were started there. So we have a brilliant relationship with a lot of amazing women who are working in the game and still are, the likes of Jackie Oatley and others. So our message is very well received. And we have really focused the strategy on celebrating the women who are working in the game. And that's well received. And everybody, including those working in the media, do understand and recognise there are still challenges, and there still aren't enough women who are journalists working in the game or working in broadcasting. So yeah, on the whole, really well received. And we are always a go-to when there are issues and there are challenges. We are always a go-to organisation, and I think recognised for our very credible position and recognised for the fact that we're not just a mouthpiece. We are actually trying to make change. And I think that's what's changed. People understand that we have programmes in place to really deliver change.
Could you tell us a bit more about the programmes?
There are lots of things that we do at Women in Football. The biggest programme is the leadership and development courses that we run, which have seen thousands and thousands of women who work in the industry, enable them to kind of continue to grow, develop their careers, give them the confidence to ensure that we can have more women in that pipeline for leadership positions, because the percentage of women in board roles is so appallingly low at football clubs, both in Premier League and EFL. So there's an awful lot of work that goes in there. We are working with the women's football players who are looking at what they do beyond the game. Big challenge is, the women's game isn't yet paying the players the same levels that you see in the men's game. So therefore, when they're coming out at a very young age, what do they do? Where do they go? How do they continue on and make a career for themselves? So we have a next goal programme, which is supporting women across the game and helping support them in the next step of their careers. And then so we're working with lots of different partners to do different things, mentorship programmes, entrepreneurship programmes for women who are starting their own businesses, so that we can really help the economic growth within game and women who are leading companies there. And then our advocacy work. So we've done a huge amount of advocacy work and are doing a huge amount of advocacy work around making sure that we have open kind of pathways and recruitment into football organisations to make sure that women are being assessed and are part of the process to ensure that we can have change at the top of the organisations, which will improve culture change too. Because unfortunately, so many of the women in our ecosystem are still experiencing very high levels of discrimination, which we see in our survey every year. And that is about culture change. And that's what we're working with a lot of clubs to help them shift that culture change.
Thank you. As you mentioned there, talking there about equality and how women in football are becoming like a spokesperson for that. And I was just wondering, obviously, it's been well documented that online racism has been directed towards footballer Jess Carter in the tournament. How will the comms have worked around the statement?
I suppose before we talk about the statement, I think the first thing to say is we have to condemn all forms of discrimination. And, I find it really disgusting that Jess faced the kind of racist abuse whilst representing her country, and that, that they are small pockets of society who still think it's acceptable to use possibly a poor performance on the pitch as a reason to discriminate against somebody, which I wanted to say first before we go into the comms, without minimising the situation, because it's so distressing. I think what the FA and the Lionesses, led clearly by Jess herself, did was they came together as a team. And I think it was quite clear it was led by Jess. She was supported by everyone. She wanted to say something and they all supported her, and they said exactly the same thing. And it's kind of what you've come to expect from the Lionesses, which is they support each other. They will stand up when they are faced with discrimination and issues like that. They will speak out. They will be very honest about it, and they will act as one. I think that's exactly what they did. And I think the community then rallied around and did exactly the same thing. And I think it was very powerful. It's just so disappointing in this day and age that is the case and that we still need to do this. I think there was very quick and positive action by the FA and the UK Football Police Unit as well in addressing the incident. Unfortunately, it does seem that the social media platforms need more accountability and question whether the Online Safety Act is yet doing the job that it was set up to do.
And would you say women in football are lobbying those sort of tech big name brands to make these changes?
Yeah, we're working with the government, and we're probably doing more lobbying with the government. There are lots of organisations that are as well. And the best thing is when we all work as a community and we work together, the likes of Brown Girls in Sport, Black Women in Sport, Kick It Out. We're all working together to lobby the government. You know, the social media platforms now are legally obligated under the Online Safety Act to remove abusive content before users see it or face fines up to 10% of global turnover. What appears to be the problem is that there is yet no teeth in this and that the online platforms aren't being fined. I'd like to, we certainly like to understand why this abusive content was able to be seen. It is illegal. It was racist and illegal. There are, concerns at how long this is taking and perhaps how seriously the online platforms are actually taking this. But yeah, there should be legal consequences. And we're working with the government to make sure that we move this along. Obviously, what we're seeing is, this is a problem across men and women's football. We're certainly seeing an increase in women in the game, both doubly from a misogynism problem and a racism problem. Misogyny is still not illegal, which is something that we campaigned to make illegal. It still isn't illegal. So that is not seen as unlawful, which is a bit of a problem. So there's many parts of this that we're coming together, working together. We're looking still to make change and move it along a lot quicker than is currently happening. There's obviously quite a lot of comms today related to the bill, because on Friday it comes into law that the social media platforms have to protect children from offensive content. So that is also going to help kind of push us along, because I know there are a lot of parties there who are very concerned about how well progressed the social media platforms are.
And so, Lisa, then what's the future of anti-racism gestures, like taking a knee before matches, do you think, in your personal view?
I mean, this is my personal view. The Lionesses decided that they won't be taking the knee anymore. And I can understand that. I think we have moved into a time where gestures are no longer enough. And I think we can look at ourselves in the comms industry sometimes and think, from a comms perspective, we want to make people aware of this. We want to make people aware of issues. So we come up with, and this was created pretty organically across the sports industry, obviously coming from NFL, but we like to have a gesture. We like to have a sign. We want to show people that you should be aware of this. This is something you should be conscious of. It brings people involved. However, we also have to look at ourselves when that's no longer working. And in this particular scenario, the Lioness is saying, this isn't working. What's the point of us taking the knee and making a point and bringing people's awareness to it if actually the people in power aren't taking the action that's required to stop this? So I respect the decision that they made. There are different kind of opinions, whether you should continue to do it to keep it on the agenda or not do it because nothing's happening. I personally kind of support the Lionesses for not continuing. It will be interesting to see whether the men's team follows suit on that. I would expect that they probably will, given that the One England DNA is very clear at the FA and they are very supportive of each other and they work together. But I can't speak to whether they will or they will not. But I'm certainly quite supportive of it.
And then what do you think is next then for Women in Football as the organisation and its campaign work after the Euros are done, hopefully with an England victory?
An England victory would be wonderful. But yes, despite whether there's a victory or not, the work for women in football absolutely continues. We are very, very long way from equality within the football ecosystem. As I said, we have a very large proportion of our membership who are still experiencing discrimination. When they are experiencing discrimination, it's often not taken seriously. And actually, it's often not being reported because they see how it's treated. So that's a real challenge for us. But it is a game of two halves, and we are starting to see a real sense of optimism from women who are working in the industry. We really want to harness that optimism and bring those women into our ecosystem, into our community, to help support us and support the other women. Women in football is only focused on gender equality. There is nothing else on our agenda. So we will continue to do that. It's a long haul, right? I think the predictions for gender equality globally just keeps getting pushed back and pushed back. And football is a difficult space to be working on this, but we have got an awful lot of support. We've got a lot of clubs who are coming on board and supporting us, as well as brand partners too. So very optimistic.
And in your view, do you think, obviously we've heard of the rollback of D&I in the US and the pressures there on big businesses. Do you think that's also filtering through to the football world?
I've not seen it directly, because ultimately this is about workforce. This is about having the best teams, the most diverse teams that will perform best. And I think we have to keep labouring that point, is if you have a diverse team, you will perform better. Commercially, you will perform better. You will perform better on the pitch, wherever it might be. There's clear research that states that. So actually, I think we keep making the commercial case for it rather than necessarily about kind of virtue signalling. I think that's what's really important. We certainly know there are some brands who are having some challenges, particularly if they are headquartered in the US, because they're not legally allowed to set KPIs and targets now around EDI. But we're not seeing it, it's certainly a bit of a concern early on about how that might impact us. But a very large proportion of the football industry does understand what we're trying to do. And this is about getting great performing teams and getting the industry to perform as best it can.
And then from an influencer perspective then, who should comms and PR professionals watch out for, or who are the rising stars then from this tournament that they might be working with in the future?
I mean, certainly if you take the true sense of the word influencer, the players on the pitch, the Lionesses in particular, they are incredibly influential. I think what they are is they're slightly different. They are athletes first and foremost. And I think, we get a win on Sunday. Every single player that plays in that in that match is going to be hot property. What's interesting for me, I think, is, where they differ from perhaps the industry looks at the likes of Love Island or, influencers that come out of TV programs, is they're super relevant, super on trend for a period of time. These are players that aren't replaced in 6 months' time. There's not another host that are going to enter the villa in 6 months, 12 months' time. Although the Lionesses have been watching an awful lot of Love Island while they've been out in Switzerland, I understand, if you listen to their podcast. But they're not going to be replaced. They're going to be here for the long haul. And what that enables them to do is just build up their equity. The Lionesses really do span generations. They have such a broad engagement with people. If you think about who you're watching the football with, from a 5-year-old to a 55 to a 70-year-old, they do different jobs for different generations, which I think is really interesting. Those that kind of break out of, I suppose, the Lioness and the football mold and transcend beyond that, that's really interesting for brands. I think Chloe Kelly is there. I think she is an icon. And I think Lucy Bronze is exactly the same. I think she has become an absolute icon this tournament. She is also my favourite, I'm going to say that. But she is breaking out. You've got to look at the likes of, Jill Scott, retired. She has transcended being a Lioness. She is a very mainstream public personality. And then, in a similar way that Leah Williamson has, she's absolutely broken out beyond football. She's broken into fashion and style. So, and the brands are clamoring for her. And then, you've got to talk about those big magic moments. If we win on Sunday, who's going to be the one that tapped that goal in, that winning goal? Is it going to be Michelle Aguiman? Is it going to be Chloe Kelly? Is it going to be a super sub that we don't know who it's going to be yet? But they're certainly going to be thrown into the spotlight very quickly.
Do you think then the same could apply to Jess Carter as well, because she's been such a strong spokesperson? Do you think that she could cause her to be more of a rising star in that sense?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because it's not a scenario where you want to have created a platform from coming under fire and being exposed to such dreadful hate. But certainly she's been vocal about it. She's clearly wanted to talk about it. And, she's a role model, and it would be great. It is really, really important for young Black and brown women and girls to have role models like Jess Carter, like Eni Aluko, like Jess Naz, to look up to, who really understand what they're going through and what some of the challenges are. So, yeah, I'm sure well, let's see how she decides to go forward. At the moment, Sunday is the main focus.
Then going back to women in football, how do you keep evolving your media strategy then? Because obviously the tournaments, they're quite a few years apart. So how do you keep that consistent momentum between them?
We have the Premier League, we have the WSL week in, week out, outside of the kind of tournament spikes, I suppose, as it were. We are constantly working with football clubs, partners within the game, and the programs that I've spoken about. What I've seen for us in terms of our comms strategy over the 5 or 6 years that I've been with the organisation is we've definitely moved and shifted our tone from a media perspective. I think previously we were perhaps seen and perhaps stereotyped as angry women, people that just were cross and angry. Perhaps we hadn't distilled our messaging, thought so much about our tone. And about 5 years ago, I think it was when we were doing a rebrand and we looked at our tone. It was like we are starting to work with the industry. We need to be able to work with the media. We need to be able to work with the government. We need to work with all these key stakeholders and football clubs. And so rather than being the people that just come out and say, this is wrong, we need to be the people to say, this is wrong, but this is how you fix it. And we're going to be here to help you because we are full of experts. We have some incredible EDI consultants, comms professionals, people who are experts in behavior and cultural change. And it's really important that we're working with the key stakeholders rather than feeling like we're the ones that are going to kind of tell them off or get them into trouble, because we're not going to change anything if that's the way we behave. So there's been quite a shift, and that's why we have a lot of partnerships with clubs now, and clubs are very, very wary for quite some time. No organisation properly has their house in order when it comes to this. Everyone's going to have issues, and we're not going to come in and say, you've got issues, you're the bad person. We're going to come in and say, look, there's some challenges around here. Let us help you, because the women that work in your organisation deserve help. And then we can create a wonderful pipeline of women that can come into your organisation too. So that shift in tone in our media and comms has been really, really important, and making sure that we're establishing what we can do to change rather than just shout about the problems.
What are the lessons then for comms professionals ahead of future tournaments? So, are there anything that could maybe be adapted for Men's FIFA World Cup that's coming up in 2026 or the Olympics further down the line?
Well, I think it's a really interesting question because, particularly with men's football, it's so established. It's always had lots of brands activating, lots of brands doing ambush campaigns, which I'm quite excited this year to see that women's game has got ambush campaigns around it, because it says it's a cultural moment, right? It says it's the time that people are engaging with it. So brands are activating and marketing and doing comms around that moment. But, the men's game is very, very established. What I think that is very interesting for the men's game to look at the women's game is actually thinking about new audiences, and not just thinking about the presumed audience that you're going after, the kind of football fan and whatever guys that might be. Actually thinking, is this an opportunity to speak to other people in a different way? Are there new ways of bringing people in? Is there a set of our customers, an audience that perhaps aren't traditionally football fans, but maybe there's a way that we can engage them that brings them in? Because obviously the women's game has had to do that. We've had to talk to people who aren't necessarily yet like super passionate, like dedicated fans that will travel the world to follow their team. So I think that's really interesting to see how men's football perhaps can appeal to a different audience. The other thing I think the men's game could really benefit from as a kind of narrative point is thinking about role models. So there was some really interesting Channel 4 research that came out recently related to male role models and how men don't feel there are enough male role models. And obviously we've seen the dangers when there are men who come out and speak out, particularly very right-wing, quite misogynistic, that they get a following. And that's actually partly because there is a dearth of really strong male role models that are promoted. The one thing in the research that they did say is that men do see those role models in sport. That is somewhere that they see them. And so I think there's a really, really great opportunity for the different federations and teams to look and see about how do they highlight those role models, and perhaps trying to break down the barriers of some of the very stereotypical kind of masculine traits, but actually look at more of the kind of whole man who isn't just this kind of super strong masculine kind of football player, but what else is there about, and making them a little bit more relatable. Caitlin Moran talks a lot about this in her book, We Need to Talk About Men. And I think that would be a brilliant, brilliant thing, both the organisations, but also the brands that are activating that space to be thinking about around some of those men's tournaments.
So overall then, what do you think the impact has been on broader sports for women?
Well, I think that's what's really interesting about the Lionesses and women's football is it's clearly, it's mainstream now. In 2022 at the last Euros, there were still seats available, and we've forgotten that and that was not long ago. Those stadiums weren't completely sold out in the early rounds. Now, you're clamoring to get hold of a ticket and probably spending a small fortune. What I think is brilliant is that the Lionesses and women's football is having a big impact on the wider ecosystem of women's sport generally. The UK has become a really great hub for hosting and known for hosting brilliant women's sports events. And the audience is really now starting to kind of pick up and understand what these events are about, the kind of brilliant atmosphere, how family focused they are, very affordable. And in very short succession, we have a Women's Rugby World Cup that's taking place here in the UK. I think there might be a few tickets left for the opening game in Sunderland. Any other England games is going to be hard to get. England are again pipped to do very well, fingers crossed. And then coming up next year, you've got a Women's Cricket World Cup also being hosted here. And it's been brilliant to see what great collaboration there are between the different sports. So we worked with the ECB this year. We did some really nice feature work. We had a female rugby player, female cricket player. We had a female footballer, Niamh Charles, who's been playing in the Euros. And we got them together and got them talking about what it feels like, how it's changed, their future career, what it's like to engage with fans. And we got such widespread coverage, in both sport and lifestyle. And so brilliant to come see those sports coming together and those women coming together to support each other, because they really want all of the sports to do well, all women to kind of have the same opportunities. So I think that's going to be a big impact. You're going to see lots more growth, more campaigns, more brands, more comms around women's sport. And we've got events after event after event in the next 12 months, which is really exciting.
Well, I think that's all we have time for this week. Thanks so much to you, Lisa, and to you for listening. And until next time, goodbye.